Today, WorldDenver talks with Isobel Coleman from the Council on Foreign Relations, and welcome to Denver.
Thanks for having me.
Nice day to come into Denver, and hopefully tomorrow will not be so bad for you. Isobel is also not only a senior fellow at the Council on Foreign Relations, but director of
Civil Society Markets and Democracy Initiative. Yeah.
Right, thank you. And the author of Paradise Beneath Her Feet, Women Transforming the Middle East, which has just been newly updated and about to be released on February 26th, and available for anyone who wants to purchase the new revised copy on Amazon.com.
Or any of the booksellers.
Any of the booksellers, right.
Yeah.
So wonderful. Well, let's talk about that book because it's the most important initiative that has been undertaken, I think, by the Council on Foreign Relations, from my perspective, for women throughout the world, because what's happening to women in the Middle East will impact women throughout the world as well. And your book is really looking at sort of the transformational role that women are playing as they are on this long march towards a stable democracy.
Yeah.
Could you explain that a bit more about what you've been looking at?
Well, it's interesting, you know, when you look at the Middle East, and certainly the American perception of women in the Middle East is one of women who are oppressed. They're forced to wear the burqa or the chador, and they're subjected to enormous violence and lack of rights. And not to say these things aren't true. In many cases, they are true. But underneath these headlines, there's a dramatic transformation going on that most Western observers miss, because you really don't hear about it much. You've seen a huge demographic shift in the region. This is a region that has been slow to go through its demographic transition, but most of the countries now are going through that transition. Women are marrying later, having fewer children. More women are working outside the home, still at lower levels than in other parts of the world, but you've seen a consistent uptick. And women have much higher levels of education than they have had in the past. This is a region that has underinvested in half of its population. And yet now women are closing those gaps. So you see equal enrollment of boys and girls at the primary school level, and now you even have girls outnumbering boys at the secondary level, and in some cases by a lot at the tertiary level, at the college level. So in a very conservative country like Saudi Arabia, women significantly outnumber men at the university level, and that's true pretty much across the region now. Even in Iran, you've seen upwards of 70% of college graduates in Iran are female. In Egypt, it's around 55%. So you've got a more educated population of women. They're working more outside the home. They're seeking a greater role in their communities, in the public sphere. And they're contributing economically to their families. They're having fewer children, so they have more time on their hands. All of these changes are driving broader changes in the society, where women are saying, well, why don't we have more rights? Why don't we have greater equality in a legal sense with men? Why must we be prohibited from working in this type of profession, or in Saudi Arabia not allowed to drive, or not allowed to own our own businesses, or whatever the restrictions on them may be? And these changes are happening at a time when there's also dramatic changes going on in media. There are dramatic changes going on in politics, as we know. There are revolutions occurring across the region. And these issues are being debated, in some cases very violently debated, about what should the role of women be in society. And you see religious arguments arguing for a much more constrained or conservative role for women. And you see women on both sides of this divide. There are some conservative women who hew to a more traditional role for themselves, and yet you also see progressive men and women wanting to live a more modern life and pushing for legal, social, and economic changes for women. So it's a very turbulent time.
So you have this conflict. You have this conflict as women are more highly educated than the generation before them. You also have this huge demographic bubble where in some cases about 60% of the population is under the age of 30. You have this massive movement, but then it runs up against that view that it's a secularist or it's a Western influence that's happening, and so you not only get a conservative backlash, but you now move to a more extremist backlash against women, which is happening in Iran. As we see, there's more of a crackdown on how the women what they should wear, but not only the classes that they should attend, the faculties that they're allowed to be part of in the university.
Well, Iran is in many ways at the furthest edge of this trend. All of the factors that I'm talking about are most developed in Iran. So you've seen women now, the fertility rate in Iran has dropped through the floor. I mean, it's below replacement level and has been for years. The age of marriage is higher than it is in the United States, the average age of marriage. And women, as I said, make up not just a small majority, but a large majority of university graduates. And yet, the legal system in Iran is really stacked against women. Even though the average age of marriage in Iran is 27 years old right now for women, which is higher than it is in the United States, the legal age of marriage is 13. So you've got a system that really constrains women in the family. Divorce is quite difficult for women. They are, as you mentioned, constricted in some of the subjects that they study, but that has been really a political backlash that's been happening on the recently. The crackdown on women has been because the government fears this women's movement. More than anything, they fear the women's movement.
Saudi Arabia too.
Well, they fear a number of things in Saudi Arabia, but there's not it's hard to equate the two because there isn't really a developed, organized women's movement in Saudi Arabia in the same way that there is in Iran. I mean, there has been an organized, active, vocal, politicized women's movement in Iran for 25 years now. And you see some very prominent women who used to be strong supporters of the regime have gone really completely against the regime. And they have protested in the streets, and they're indefatigable. They just refuse to give up. Evin prison is filled with women. It's like a coffee clutch of women activists who are stuck in this prison because of their activities on the streets. They just are in and out because they really refuse to give up. They refuse to be intimidated.
Which leads to the backlash. The backlash against women increases the amount of violence against women, and we see that in Afghanistan. We certainly see it in Iran. There is increasing violence, and I know that's the topic of the Commission on the Status of Women in New York in the next 2 weeks, is to address that.
Well, I think we have to be careful when we talk about increasing violence against women. I mean, certainly in Afghanistan, there's been war going on, and there's been terrible violence against women for decades in Afghanistan. And
I was thinking about Pakistan too.
Well, what I think you're seeing is more reporting about the violence against women. I don't know. We don't have statistics to show that rape, for example, is higher now than it was before. What you're seeing as part of this sea change, as part of this transformation, is that, if a girl in Pakistan was raped, she had sex outside of marriage, which is shameful, and her response should be to commit suicide. And this has been an age-old resolution to this terrible issue, is that the poor girl has brought shame on herself and her family, and she commits suicide. Today, you're seeing a very different reaction. Women are saying, no, I was raped, and you are the perpetrator. And they're going to their local mullah, who is calling these men to task. They're going to the local media, and those stories are being picked up in the international press. It's a very different reaction that's happening today than you've seen for centuries. Women have a different outlet, a different avenue to press for change than they have in the past. So we don't know what the statistics are in terms of violence against women. There's certainly politically motivated violence, but look, throughout history, women who have raised their hand. The nail that sticks up gets hammered down, and that's been true for centuries. So I'm sure you've had many examples of young women who've tried to go outside the contours of what's expected of them, and they've paid the price for it. But we're hearing about it today in an unprecedented fashion.